All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Independent News Source. We are your hosts with the famous guest. Go ahead, Nadine. Dina, explain who our guest is.
Our guest is Gary Wayne, author and researcher of Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Hello,
Hi,
Gary. How are you?
Gary. How are you?
Very good. So excited to be here with you guys today and really looking forward to a very interesting show. And I don't know whether or not your audience is all that aware with the book I've written or some of the things that I talk about on YouTube and other venues, but I think they're going to find it rather interesting.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I'm really familiar about what you write with. You write about the bloodlines, how you call, how you say the 12 bloodlines, I believe, way back then. You write about how you say the Nephilims, DNA changing and all that. I was really familiar with this. Actually, matter of fact, I just barely purchased your book and I'm waiting for it to come in.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. You should have let me know. I would have sent you a book. Yeah, so if people aren't familiar with my book, it's called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And just to give a quick overview so that people can understand what we're going to be talking about is it's a 6,000-year connect the dots investigation into how the giants of Genesis 6 were created, progeny they created, how they partnered with the rise of the Cain descendants, the mystical religions, and the secret societies, and all partnering to totally corrupt the antediluvian world that brings on the flood. How the Nephilim, how the organizations, how the religions and the secret societies crossed the flood, how they affected the post-diluvian world, how they affected our history, right up to today as to what they're doing today and how they're planning about bringing about the end time. So it spans a long period of time and it's absolutely loaded with information.
Well, like I said, I'm all open ears to listen to what you how you call it, investigated. I believe you've been how you say researching this for like over 30 years, right?
That's correct. And it wasn't going to be my first book. I was going to actually just write books about prophecy. So I thought I was going to write a short book to cut my teeth on. But I began to say, okay, if I'm going to connect the giants to the end times, let's just do a little bit more additional research on that. And the more I dug into it, the more doors it opened. And it soon turned into more of a conspiracy book as well as a prophecy book. And so once you go down the rabbit hole, it just never stops. So I kept researching and more doors were opening. And eventually I just had to say, you know, I'm just going to probably be talking more of the same thing. And it's already a very, very large book. So that's when I decided to cut it off and just shorten it down to a level and a size where people could actually read it, and in chapter sizes where they can absorb it. But it is one of those things that, you know, and as I do more shows about it, I mean, there's just more information coming out all the time.
Yeah, I guess a short book went from like I guess you were gonna write say maybe about a good 100 pages, something like that, to be like 800, 900,000 pages long.
Yeah, it's just over 800 pages, and you know, I took out it was about 1,150 pages before I took the first edit out, and because it just becomes too long. So anything that wasn't absolutely essential to the story, I took out.
Yeah, I was like, wow, I was amazed when I found out it took you 30 years just for you to almost write this whole book. You know, I was
Yeah,
like, wow.
yeah, a lot of that was in research. So hard time in writing it, probably about 12 years and trying to connect it because it's a very intricate book. So quite proud of it, and it is very well annotated. So one of the interesting things is that I wanted to do, at least I thought was interesting, was I wanted to make sure that I took most of the speculation out. And so in doing so, I show all of the sources. So when I'm letting other people talk or other societies talk or other religions talk, I'm letting them speak in their own words, and it's lining up with exactly what was told in the Bible, only from a polytheist perspective. And so what I did was I researched secret societies, I researched a number of religions and their holy books, and I use that to show that what they're telling is a polytheist perspective of prehistory and a polytheist perspective of what's going to happen in the end time that matches up with what the Bible says, and measure it against what the Bible says, and I'll clarify where they drift on that in the book. But it's the identical story. So it's very, very important to understand what they think and what they believe, because they're the ones who are going to be bringing about the end time.
Okay. Well, go ahead and let us know more or less what you investigated and researched, and bring it all onto the table.
Sure. So I want to start with, before we get into Genesis 6, I want to begin with Cain. And Cain is a very, very important figure as this whole sort of conspiracy begins. And most people understand that, you know, he's the daughter, or he's the son of Adam, and he is ostracized from Adam and Eve for murdering his brother Abel. Well, what most people don't know, what the secret societies will talk about in other religions, is that Adam was taught great things while in Eden, and they call it the 7 sacred sciences. And so when Adam leaves Eden, he teaches the 7 sacred sciences to Cain, and he also teaches them to Abel, but Abel is murdered. And then Adam will pass that on to Seth, who practices these sciences in a way that honors God, recognizes him as the creator of the universe, and leads people to God. But Cain is going to take these 7 sacred sciences and do the exact opposite. So he's going to develop the sciences in a way that disrespects God, does not give God credit for anything, and leads people away from God. And he passes this on to his son Enoch. And for people who may not have realized it, there's 2 Enochs. There's the Enoch that's the son of Jared of the Seth line, and there's Enoch, son of Cain, and they both write scripture. And so one has to be able to distinguish and discern the difference between the 2 Enochs and what their effect on prehistory was. And they developed these sciences into a great level, a level that people don't realize. And when Jesus says that the days of Noah, that when he comes back the second time, will be like the days of Noah. If we're at a technology level that we are today, and it is not the end times right now, but we may be on the horizon of moving into the end times, then we have to understand that these sciences were developed to a level that were as great as what we have today, or perhaps even greater. And out of this development of these religions in prehistory, they develop a religion to house it and to keep it secret, and to only educate the elite into mystery schools. And so you have secret societies being developed the religions, and you have this religion being developed that is contrary to what God has taught. And then by Genesis 6, they are partnering with fallen angels who are also in this mix of conspiracy, and the sons of God will go to the daughters of human females and mate with them and create Nephilim. And Nephilim were demigods and giants of prehistory. And it's these supernatural giants that usurp the kingships in the antediluvian epoch. And they partner with the descendants of Cain. So they have an organizational structure that looks like this. You have a giant Nephilim king ruling and installing a totalitarian rule and imposing a polytheist religion and imposing this new technology and sciences on the world, so that the whole world is now being led away from God. The whole world is being corrupted, and not just in violence, but whether or not it is in changing the genome of plants, as what we're seeing today, or cross mating other species. The whole world becomes not only corrupted with violence, but also corruption as a whole. And this will bring on the flood. And what people also need to understand about what's going on with the giants in Genesis 6 is that the first Nephilim of the first generation had an immortal spirit. Now, their bodies weren't immortal, and their bodies will eventually die, whether or not they commit suicide or they're slain somehow, but their spirits do not go to sleep. And it's from these spirits who are not permitted to go into heaven and aren't permitted to go to sleep are what we look at as demons today. So all of this has a lot of impact as we roll that forward to the end time, because now you start to see parallels of technology, mystical religions, and if you look into the end time, you have the appearance of demons, you have the abyss being open, you have fallen angels, you have war of heaven, and you have a whole bunch of interesting little connections there, just to sort of wrap that through to the end time. So I'm thinking with what I've just said about what the antediluvian epoch looks like in these different organizations and the giants, you probably have a number of questions you may want to have me dig a little bit deeper into.
Yeah, I do, but you know what? This is interesting. I do not want to interrupt you. You're talking about what you're talking. You got me intrigued here.
Okay, and so we have this concept of this knowledge that is actually embedded into mythology and religions, around the world. And we'll know that as today as this whole mythos carries forward. You might have heard of things like the Pearls of Wisdom, or the Archives of the Masons, or the Emerald Tablet, or the Hidden Vaults of Enoch, or the Golden Fleece, or the Tables of Destiny, or the Golden Apples, or the Hall of Records, or the Tablet of Hermes, or the pot of rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or the Shatia. These are all allegories for this knowledge that was developed in the antediluvian epoch. And Enoch, son of Cain, what he does is he records this knowledge, and he writes them in 36,525 books as the mythology goes on the polytheist side, which is a solar sun-worshipping number, because Enoch, son of Cain, in his religion that he creates, it's the sun-worshipping religion, which is the same polytheist religion that we have today that's around the world and that was in history. And he stores them in 9 vaults to be protected so that this knowledge is not going to be lost. And in the Masonic records, they look at Enoch as being the one who brought the knowledge to build the pyramids. And so they accredit Enoch with much of the knowledge of the ancient epoch. And people might be surprised to learn that Freemasonry takes their history back to Enoch as their main patriarch, as well as Lamech, and there's 2 Lamechs. I'm talking about the Lamech, the descendant of Cain, and his siblings, such as Tubal-Cain. These are all patriarchs in the Freemasonic religion, which is Gnosticism, which is polytheism, and in the secret society. And so it's very, very important to understand these connections. And so they have their own history that they teach in their secret societies and in their religion that I'm drawing off of here. And so when we look at the 7 sacred sciences, Freemasonry takes the 5th science, which is called geometry. They actually call it masonry, from where they take their name, right? And from the technology of the masonry, that's where all of the ancient megaliths come from. And that's where the knowledge came from. And that's why in Freemasonry today, you still have everything that goes back with an Egyptian allegory and connected to pyramids and everything else. And another thing that we should understand about the antediluvian epoch is that around the world is the same story being told. And what's being told is the creation of humankind, the world going bad, the world rebelling and being led by giants into rebellion. They talk about the mystical religions and all of these religions around the world, and there's always a flood to wipe out the people of the earth and start anew. So this is a common history, just as pyramids are in all religions and mythologies that are talked about around the world, just as they're on all continents. This is a common legacy we have. We just have different accounts of what it's being told. Now, in case the audience is wondering, I'm a Christian, and I believe that what the Bible says is the accurate monotheist telling of the story. And the other ones, although they may be accurate, they may not be, but they do line up very, very well with what the Bible says, but corrupted from a polytheist perspective. And so with the flood coming, these regimes, and there's thought to be anywhere from 7 to 9, and some people as low as 4. And the reason why it's 7 is the more common understanding of the number of civilizations in the ancient period is that you have 7 watchers that people may be familiar with that name. If they're not, these are a special order of angel that ruled over 7 cult centers on 7 mountains. And that's why mountains are so important to the allegory of prehistory. And they talk about whether it's in the Chinese mythology and religion of the 7 sacred mountains, or in whether it's in Greek mythology where you have the Mount Olympus gods, and there are 7 main gods in that talking. There was a consensus in prehistory that there was a number of civilizations ruled over by gods. And in all of these civilizations, whether it's Titans, or it's the Daitria in India, or it's the Anunnaki in Sumeria, the gods, or as we would understand it, fallen angels, go to the human females and create the demigods to rule over the humans of the earth. And again, it's one of those standard sort of constitutive things coming out of prehistory that all cultures around the world have recollections of. And these watchers were the ones that led other watchers, and these are the seraphim angels that are talked about in Isaiah 6, that they led them to Mount Hermon, as Enoch likes to talk about in the first book of Enoch, where 200 watchers mated with human females. Interesting thing about these giants and the seraphim angels is when I talk about giant, I'm not talking about a being that is 8 feet tall. I'm talking about beings that are at least 20 to 40 feet tall in the first generation. They were monsters, and they weren't just tall and gangly. They were very, very broad and muscular. And so, you know, the average human will have a 3 to 1 height to width ratio. The Nephilim had a 2 to 1. So they were about 50% wider and significantly bigger. And they were fleet of foot. And they had deep bellowing voices like you hear in Greek mythology, those sort of raucous voices that you'll see in some of the recreations of the Titans. And they also look like their fathers. And the fathers being seraphim angels, which comes from the word seraph, which is also referenced in the book of Numbers, are these venomous snakes, or Nakash. And there's 2 different applications, one Nakash being serpent and the seraph venomous angels. But both of them reflect what the watcher angels look like. And so if you have a face of a serpent and you have these wings, you have a dragon. Only in this case, it's an angelic dragon. And so dragons are also very important in this allegory to understand what was going on in prehistory and what comes down through history. And so the angels, the watcher angels, looking like seraphim angels, they produced offspring where the giants looked just like them. And their eyes also glowed from the giant side. So they were known as the shining ones, just as they were in Anunnaki and fairy mythology and other mythologies. So when you see in prehistory, whether or not it's Quetzalcoatl in Central American, or it's Osiris in Egyptian mythology, or it's the Anunnaki in Sumerian mythology, or it's Zeus and the Olympian gods in Greek mythology, and on and on and on and on and on, and including even Native American mythology and religion, where they take their history back to the White Snake clan from the feathered serpent gods, right? There's this connection all around the world that recognizes out of prehistory that the gods look like serpents and snakes. And we also have statues like out of the Ugaritic sites that have statues, and we have engravings of the serpent-like beings that were the demigods or the offspring. So these were horrible-looking beasts that were ruling the antediluvian world. And when I say antediluvian, all I mean by that is before the flood as opposed to post-diluvian. And then what's really interesting is that, well, when we talk about this, is also in Genesis 6, it says God steps in to limit the life of humans to 120 years. And this is all life, because that's referring to that immortal spirit that we were talking about, that were in the first generation of the Nephilim, that creates the demon spirits after the bodies die. And also we learn in Genesis 6 that not only were the Nephilim before the flood, but afterwards. And we're not told how they survived the flood. We're only told that they do.
That was my question to you. I was about to ask you, how did they survive if supposedly the Lord wiped them all out? The ark with Noah, or?
Yeah, no. Well, there's several different speculations, but let's just clarify what it says in the Bible first. So what it does say about the flood is God destroyed everything he created in Genesis 6:7 and Genesis 7:4. The distinction here is that the Nephilim are not created by God. They're created by a violation against creation, whereby the beings of heaven, the watcher angels, violate creation to copulate with humans to create an immortal spirit or an immortal God in the physical world, right? So when we look at what God is telling us about the flood story, we know that these Nephilim are after the flood because it says so, but we also says everything is destroyed, but everything that he created. However it happens, what we do know is after the flood, and I'm going to come back to three or four ways that they can survive the flood in a second, is that these giants do show up. And how do we know that? Well, the Old Testament is filled with accounts of the Nephilim. And they show up at the time of Abraham in Genesis 14, in the war of 4 kings against 5, where the Mesopotamian alliance is coming into Sodom and Gomorrah. They're having a war against all of these giant nations. And they're also, these same giant nations are still around at the time of the Exodus. So some of the names of these giant nations that I'm talking about would be the Rephaim, which Og was a Rephaim, and said to be the last survivor of the Rephaim, which is very, very interesting because there's more Rephaim in the covenant land after Og is defeated and killed. So he can't be the last of the Rephaim, but he could be last of the surviving Rephaim, which is a division of Nephilim. And you also have the Anakim, or the Anak, or the Anakites, as some people will call them. And they're throughout the promised land as well. And they come from Arba, is their father, which Kiriath Arba comes from, which is the modern name for Hebron, which is the place where David was crowned king twice, once for Judah, once for Israel. And you also have Rapha, is also mentioned in the Bible as the father of the Rephaites. And you also have the Ozim, you have the Avim, you have the Emim, you have the Zamzamim, and on and on and on about all of these different giant nations whose genealogy does not go back to the Table of Nations. And when I talk about the Table of Nations, that's the nations being formed from the descendants of Noah and the 3 sons that come off the ark. And that's in First Chronicles and also in Genesis. And they do not link back. And then you also have Seir, who the descendants of Esau will marry into, that come out of nowhere. And these are the chiefs of Edom. And they do not have a genealogy that goes back to the Table of Nations. So we know somehow these giant nations are thriving after the flood. We do know that the Nephilim were said to be before and after the flood. We're just not told how. And how it connects back is that it says in the Bible, in Numbers, it'll say, the Anakim is, or the Anakites. I like to say I am with the suffix because that stands for ones, right? And I like to denote all of the races that I'm talking about that are giants with im, just as in Nephilim or Seraphim were their fathers of this race. So just so I'm people understand why I'm using the IM suffix as opposed to an ite or an ITE. And so when we look at these, at that, how do we link them back as the two main ones as being Rephaim and Anakim? We know that that the Anakim are called the descendants of Nephilim in Numbers, and we also know that Anakim are Rephaim, and then all these other nations that I've talked about are also Rephaim. So it connects back Anakim, Rephaim, Nephilim. And that's how it's laid out in the Bible. That's how we know that they're the same kinds of giants. Now, how do they survive the flood? Which is the real big question that you're getting at, but I did want to give some details so that people can understand that I'm not making this stuff up. And so there's only 3 or 4 ways that they can survive the flood. And so the first one is that, or at least show up after the flood. The first one would be is that somehow they're on the ark, which a lot of people actually will believe in a few different ways. I tend to look at that one as the least likely, but it's still possible. And so when you get into the Gnostic religions, they believe that Noah was a giant. They believe the giants, and there's different stories on the Gnostic side. They believe Ham was a giant. They believe all of them were giants on the flood. At certain Gospels will tell. And there's also a theory that the women, the wives that married the sons of Noah, carried a Nephilim gene. Now, I do not believe any of the people on the boat on the ark were giants, and I don't believe they, as in some Jewish legends, Og somehow grabbed onto the side of the ark and Noah fed him, and that's how he survived the flood. Again, interesting, but we don't have any detail on that in the Bible, so really hard to confirm. And the idea that the gene is carried of Nephilim within the daughters, that they were part of the corrupted people of the earth that came on the flood, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you have the genealogy of Noah that goes right back to Adam, and they've kept that genealogy so that you can see the pureness of it. And we know Noah was pure, and we know therefore the sons were pure. Why would they now bring on the corruption on the boat? That makes no sense. It's a possibility. I'm just not a fan of that one, but I do recognize that is possible. Okay, so way number 2 is that they survived the flood because they're warned by the fallen angels that the flood is coming. And in the Book of Giants of Enoch, which I think is the evil Enoch, son of Cain scripture that is coming, that we've seen come up out of the Qumran scrolls and discoveries, talks about a couple of giants going to Enoch and saying, we're getting these nightmares of this great catastrophe that's coming. And Enoch, son of Cain, tells them, there's nothing you can do about the flood. You can only prepare for it. And he gets that information from the fallen angels. And in all accounts around the world, there are stories within the religion and mythologies about these gods going to individuals, generally giants, to build an ark to survive the flood. And we get the best account of that coming out of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is used to diminish the biblical version, and they say it's an older surviving copy of the flood account, and that makes it legitimate, and it makes the Bible copying it and corrupting it from the Sumerian version or the Anunnaki version. I have a little bit different take on it, is that it is just an older surviving document. It doesn't make it the source document. But when you look at the details of what the Epic of Gilgamesh is talking about, as opposed to what the biblical Noah story is talking about, they're similar on a macro level, but to use a pun on it, the devil is in the details. And so the Epic of Gilgamesh of the flood story is part of a number of books and 12 tablets that were discovered. And the person telling the story is Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh either survives the flood because he is one of the kin of Upnapishtim or Zudur, depending on the translation that you're using, who is the Sumerian Noah, or he is recreated after the flood, what I would call a second incursion. And a second incursion is another way you could have Nephilim after the flood. So that means fallen angels going after the flood begin to procreate to create giants. And what we have the story being told to is a person called Enkidu or Enkidu, depending on the translation that you're using. And what is going on here is that both of them are described as 2/3 God and 1/3 human. And Enkidu is created to offset the tyrannical, horrible nature of Gilgamesh, because he's terrorizing the people just as the Nephilim did before the flood and what they do again after the flood. And so just in the preamble of the Epic of Gilgamesh is we have two Nephilim or Anunnaki being talked about. And Upnapishtim is the king at the time of the flood, and he is also 2/3 God and 1/3 human. And he's the archetypical Nephilim or Anunnaki, and he takes all of his family to survive the flood. So this whole story is not a story of human survival. This is a story of Nephilim survival, right? So a different account, maybe a parallel account. So I look at it as the Epic of Gilgamesh is either a parallel story or it's the corrupted version, as opposed to what seculars will say is the other way around. And also in Greek mythology, you have the account of Deucalion, who they call the Greek Noah, and Pyrrha, who they call his wife, which is Noah's wife. But again, this is not a Noah story. Who is Deucalion? Well, Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. And Prometheus is either a Titan or also described as a Titan god. And in Greek mythology, as in Sumerian mythology, you have two levels of Titans. One is the heavenly Titan, and one is the earthly Titan. In other words, one is an angel, and one is a hybrid, a Nephilim. And you have Anunnaki being talked about the same way. And this is a common sort of ideology that comes out of the rest of the world. So, but it doesn't really matter whether or not Deucalion is the son of the god or an offspring of the Nephilim. He's still Nephilim, right? So this again is a survival story, and all around the world they're either being saved on arks or climbing to mountains. And also out of Gnosticism, you also have Gospels that will talk about, and particularly Amunka Seth, who is another Nephilim type being who is taken off-world in a cloud to be protected and saved from the flood. But the common denominator in all of this are fallen angels that are either procreating new Nephilim after the flood or are helping to survive their preferred being that they help procreate in the antediluvian epoch and to be saved from the flood. So that's the common denominator here. So was I kind of clear on all those different types of possibilities?
You were. Yes, you were.
So, but again, in the Bible, we're not told which way they survive, only that they do, and that they continue to intermarry with people after the flood. And we get that from Amalek, as example, a descendant of Esau who marries into the people who are in Seir or in lower Saudi Arabia there. And he actually takes the name of Amalek. And so we don't really know his true name. And Amalek is traced back, and I'll cover that off in the book, to be a giant from the antediluvian epoch. And so the Amalekites, the mysterious Amalekites, and I'll spend a fair bit of time on them in my book, were a giant race that the descendants of Esau marry into. And so it creates this great Amalekite race through the grandson of Esau. And it's through Eliphaz, son of Esau, and Timnah, which is a Horite, which is another name for a giant nation and one of the nations in the War of 4 Kings against 5 I mentioned earlier. And you also have a more clear-cut following of that with the descendants of Japheth. So when you get into the descendants of Japheth who moved northward out of the Middle East and settled into Greece and to northwest Turkey and into some of the islands, as the Bible will outline, you have a couple of sons named Magog and Gog. And again, I believe they've taken the names of giants that survived the flood and replaced it with their own names, because Gog and Magog are gods or titans out of Greek mythology. And these are also giants in English mythology, Gog and Magog, that are in English history. And Gog in Greek is translated as giant. So I think we see that. We also know Ham marries into descendants or the Nephilim and creates the Amorites and a whole bunch of other hybrid branches of Nephilim that dominate the land of the covenant, and branching even further out in terms of where the Canaanites settle, and mostly through the son of the descendants of Canaan, son of Ham. So it's a common thing that is going on early on in the flood, is this intermarrying and recorruption of humans with the surviving Nephilim. And the Nephilim, what they do is they usurp kingship again after the flood. And this is where all the dynasties come from that come down through history. So whether or not it's the Amalekite dynasty, they were considered one of the pure ones before they were totally destroyed, or it's the Hittite dynasty, or it's the Nimrod dynasty, or the Mesopotamian dynasty, or the Mitanni dynasty, which is probably a little bit more familiar with people of history, that is in Mesopotamia, or it's the Egyptian dynasty. These are all Nephilim kings, and they create these long-lasting dynasties that produce the royal families throughout our history after the flood. And they also partner with the mystical religions, and they start to develop the secret societies again. And the question gets to be is how do we know that? Well, let's look at Babel. And so Babel, we're not really connected with Nimrod in the book of Genesis. It's just that it's sort of in and around. But we know Nimrod is a very, very, very interesting character, and he's listed for his infamy as opposed to the pureness of his soul and the things that he did. But he partners with a fellow by the name of Hermes, which is a very, very important figure in polytheism and in Egyptian religion. And what Hermes does is he finds two pillars. And these two pillars are made by either Enoch or the sons of Lamech, depending on which legends that you're talking about coming out of prehistory. These would be the same two pillars that you see in the Masonic temples that they call Joachim and Boaz. But that's only told at the lower levels. At depth levels, they are understood to be the pillars of Lamech. And what's written on the pillars of Lamech and why they were created was they list the seven sacred sciences, and the mystical religions, and the rituals, as much information as they can get on them. And then on the other pillar is the location where all of this knowledge was stored under the pyramids in Egypt, which I talked about earlier, that were the 9 volts of Enoch. And they're stacked on top of each other. And so Hermes finds these pillars, and he gets the knowledge, and he gets the rituals of the religion and the religion, he brings them back to Babel. And now we have the rebellion that's going on at Babel. And Babel City and Babel Tower is the first manifestation of the 7 sacred sciences after the flood. And it's the first manifestation of the 5th science that we talked about before, called masonry and geometry, by building the city and building the tower. And according to Freemasonic records, Nimrod, after getting this information, writes the first constitution for Freemasonry after the flood. And he's the first Grand Master of the post-Diluvian flood. And we get a hint as to how powerful this religion is in Genesis, even though it just hints at it, where it talks about people with one language and working together, nothing will now be prevented from them of doing. This is a reflection of this knowledge that is being redeveloped after the flood. And so what we have going on in at Babel is all of the sins of the antediluvian world is now taking place in the post-diluvian world. And so what God does is he steps in, and he said this was going to be a second chance for humankind. And for this to play out, and so that humankind can be saved and be raised above angels in the future time, we're going to give a little bit more time, and we're going to confuse the languages and disperse the people around the world. And that's where Babel comes from, confusion of languages. But Nimrod, after Babel, he starts off, he begins his dynasty of kingships, and he builds more cities and the development of the mystical religions and the knowledge in Mesopotamia. And we understand those actions through the cities that he built and the mystery religion that he develops, and what they're called are magi or wise ones, right? And these are like wizards, right? These are the wizards and the priests that you see as an allegory coming out of Atlantis and Lord of the Rings and all those other types of films and stories. It's a reflection of an allegory to the religion. But what's interesting is he also is the father of the Akkadians, and Babel translates out of Akkadian not as confusion of language, but as El as in God, and Bab as in gateway. And so it's a gateway to the God. So people really do, because of this, they speculate, and I think, you know, with some legitimacy, is what were they really doing at Babel? You know, were they trying to create a Stargate to bring fallen angels back into our realm to recreate the Nephilim? And that's kind of odd, because if you could take another step back and say, what happened when the fallen angels violated the laws of creation? Did anything happen to them? Well, the book of Enoch will tell us exactly what happened to them. And we'll get some verses in the New Testament about referring to these spirits that are in the abyss. And we also in Revelations will understand that these things are going to be released in Revelation 9 in the end time. So what happens is those impassioned angels who created the Nephilim and the worst of the demons are locked into the abyss, right? So then why do they need a Stargate? Well, maybe they're trying to get the beings out of the abyss to come back, because those are the ones that have already violated the laws of creation. Or for some reason that these rebellious angels are no longer, who weren't impassioned, were no longer able to go to the earth. But then maybe they're trying to create a Stargate into that. That's all speculation, but there's so many unanswered questions about what's really going on at Babel. But when you start to connect some of these dots, you can ask some really good questions and start to figure out what may have been going on. So this is the beginning of how the Nephilim are going. This is the beginning of how the Nephilim start to dominate humankind after the flood. Do you have any questions or areas you want me to dig in on that?
Okay, no, the main thing I was kind of trying to say when you said about it was going to be this day of Noah.
Yep.
And so basically that means when we're going back to the day of Noah, we're going to be having Nephilims and all them run around the whole earth again.
Well, that's, you know, if you take that literally, and I am a literalist, then you would expect that there's going to be Nephilim or descendants of Nephilim ruling the end time. It can only be one of the two, and that's why it's important to understand that keep that possibility open that they're going to be creating new Nephilim in the end time, and I'll talk about a few different options on that. Or we have to be very, very concerned about the descendants of the Nephilim as they come down through the royal families. And if you look at the King James Version on how it translates the empires that Daniel talks about in the book of Daniel. It's the seed of these empires, right? And the seed of these royal families. So one expects that the 10 empire of the end time will be these ennobled bloodlines from the royal families. There'll be 10 kings of the end time, and one expects from that sort of language that could be telling us that these are the descendants of Nephilim. And we also know that Antichrist is described in Revelation as the one who was, now is not, but will be again for a short time. So that might suggest he's a Nephilim coming from before, or he's going to be possessed, because he's also the same one. It's also referred to in Revelation where he's the one who comes up out of the abyss, right? Which is Abaddon or Apollyon. So maybe it's a descendant of Nephilim who's going to be Antichrist and is also possessed by one of these ancient demon Nephilim. So hard to know on that. Now, other ways that you can have Nephilim in the end time is, other than the descendants or other than another creation of giants, is through some other concepts. And that can be transhumanism that's going on today, or bionic parts, or cloning. And you can create reprobate beings without having an angelic intervention, or through DNA manipulation. You can enhance and improve. And that's known as the new man concept as well, which is a Nazi concept, which they were trying to do the same thing, is create the end time with the new man that is Aryan, which goes back to their understanding of prehistory and giants, who they believe they came from, to rule the world in the end time.
Wow, that's very interesting.
And so I also believe that when it says the whole world was corrupted before the flood, that's what we're seeing going on today with DNA manipulations and with genome manipulations and Frankenstein vegetables and things like that, that it is being changed from how God had originally created it. And when we look at some examples out of other religions and mythologies, we have these fantastic beings talked about in the antediluvian epoch. You have centaurs, for example, right? You have the Pegasus, you have Cyclops, you have an elephant-faced god in India, you have the Chimera, you have so many of these, what you would have normally have thought as fanciful, imaginative, fictional beings, which we all were taught when we were growing up. But when you understand the technology that they had to manipulate DNA, and had a technology that's probably greater than ours, is that they probably had the same ability that we're just starting to get to totally corrupt the whole world.
Oh, wow. This is so amazing. I mean, you're actually blowing my mind right now with all this.
Gary, I have a question. Is this why, I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with this, but is this why they're chemtrailing? They're trying to manipulate our DNA, trying to change it maybe in some kind of way?
That's certainly one option that's being thrown out on that. I'm not sure that that's what they're doing from that end to manipulate the DNA. I think that they're trying... I think they're trying to manipulate our DNA actually at the DNA level. What they're doing, I think, with the chemtrails, and again, they look at us, the descendants of giants, and the secret societies and the adepts at these religions. They don't look at humans as, a worthy being. We are mundane, inferior beings. So they don't care whether they slaughter us en masse. We're just like cattle to them. So I think they're manipulating the environment so that they can cattle herd people into world government. And if there's disease and problems that come out for humans because of the chemtrails, I think that's just bonus to them.
To me, in a way, I kind of agree with you, but in a way, I kind of feel that they're chemtrailing us to, do what they call the terraforming the Earth, so they could get it prepared for the Nephilims to come in. Because I guess our DNA is not what they're expecting it to be. So to me, I feel like they're terraforming the whole Earth.
Well, they're definitely affecting the environment in ways that are not reported on and in ways that are not really predicted. So it's hard to know what that outcome is going to be. But what we do know is that, according to prophecy, is that in the end time, not only will we have these angelic type beings and the demons, we'll have the alien thing that probably is intermixed in this mythos that's going to be part of the end time deception. But the earth is prepared for disasters and catastrophes. And so you have these storms and you have hurricanes and all sorts of things and disease that's going on in the end time. And I think that's part of what they're doing with the chemtrails. And one of the ways that you herd people into world government is you go back to the Babel concept. And if you look at the Babel concept and also understand that Babylon is Babel, right? So it's the religion of Babel for the end time. And that allegory is there for us to go back and understand, because again, the days of Noah lived for 950 years. He lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So look at the events on both sides of the flood when Noah lived, and that includes Babel and Sodom and Gomorrah. So when we look at what was going on that they were doing, is we have to understand that the days of Noah are going to include all of these different things, right? And that included, when we look at Babel, is the first Antichrist figure with Nimrod and the first universal sway over people. And they talked in one language and they had one religion, which is the Babylon part of the end time prophecy. So one of the things that they need to do to get world government is they have to work on things that transcend national borders, and that will drive humans into the open arms of the tyrants. And part of that is the environment, because the environmental issues crosses all borders, and you can see that being utilized all around the world. And you also have nuclear war apocalyptic scares and that capability, because the people at Babel came together for fear of being wiped from the face of the earth, and that's what they're going to try and do to get us to accept world government. So it's in their interest to have wars going on all over the place, to have anarchy, to have the threat of apocalypse, whether or not it's through asteroids or it's through overpopulation or it's through destroying the environment, nuclear attack, you name it. They use that as a scare tactic to drive us into accepting world government. So I'm open to both possibilities, I guess, where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I have to agree with you 100%. You're amazing. You're like I said, you're showing me something, actually teaching me something that I kind of knew a little bit about, but now that you opened up the book and you opened up the the play calls, I'm like, wow, I don't even know which direction to go to.
Yeah, and another connection that I like to make between prehistory and the end time is when you get into Luke and he talks about the days of Noah, he has a little bit different spin on it than what Mark and Matthew do, and he connects it to the fire and brimstone that destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. And so what you have is two things going on there. One is the idea that it's more than just people marrying and not caring about things, but Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed by fire, and the antediluvian epoch is destroyed by water. But the end time is going to be destroyed by fire. That's what Peter talks about, what we see in Revelation and all the Old Testament prophets. And then the second thing is well, what was going on at Sodom and Gomorrah? That would be used instead of the days of Noah. Because at Sodom and Gomorrah, as the Gnostics believe, is that was the first replanting or the first civilization of the Nephilim after the flood. and that they believe that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed not because they were cities of evil, but they were cities of light. And then we also look at what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. We have sexual violations, right? Everybody's familiar with that. But sexual violations covers all sexual violations. And again, one wonders whether or not there was Nephilim being recreated as the other possible type of sexual violation. That was also part of why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And we also know that when the four kings of Mesopotamia in Genesis 14 at the time of Abraham, who, you know, Abraham has to save Lot from, because he's captured in that war. The Mesopotamian alliance is coming in to attack the nation of giants, right? And so this is a war against giants. And so giants are around at the Sodom and Gomorrah time. So I do not believe that what Jesus says in the book of Luke or the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is a totally isolated event. I think we're being told to look at it more clearly to help us also to understand what's going to, you know, how we link what's going to happen in the end time. And it is going to be the second apocalypse, this time by fire.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, because I know and I think it's Genesis, right, where the Lord says he's not gonna flood. He killed everybody. Okay, I hate to say the way he did that, but okay, he got rid of everybody with the flood. But this time back, he's not gonna flood us. Some of us are gonna get flooded now, but the whole world will not be flooded. He's gonna
And he sealed that with
by fire.
Yeah, he sealed it with the Rainbow Covenant that he would not destroy the world by water again. But he never said anything about not having it destroyed by fire. And again, it's one of those constitutive things that in pretty much all the other religions around the world, in their end time scenario, it is a world destroyed by fire. And we just came through like 2012, which is the start of the you know, the new age that everybody said we were going to be destroyed in 2012. Well, you know, one of those epochs is 2,360 years. So it may be early on in this epoch that happens, but it wasn't 2012, as we all know. But that world, according to the Aztecs and the Mayas, as they take that religion back, this is also destroyed by fire. So it's one of those things that are in most accounts of where human destiny is going.
Wow. This is okay. So basically, Bible, okay, like you said, it says that we were going to burn by fire.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing is that, okay, he got rid of us with the water was because is that why he thought that was the best thing for him to do at that time? Or
Well,
what do you
think?
think?
Yeah. Well, I think that what was trying to be done was, you see, if you go back to the creation of Adam, I mean, Adam is created for a specific reason. And he is going to have him and his descendants raised above humankind in the future time, right? But the angels, especially the rebellious angels, they're not happy about this, that this lower being is going to be raised above them. And so the creation of Adam and the rebellion of the fallen angels is intricately related to what happens to humankind, because these fallen angels, they're not wanting to be judged and thrown into the lake of fire. And they're trying to make sure that this promise that is given to Adam doesn't happen, and it somehow justifies their own rebellion, so they could live in another realm, because they knew they could never defeat God. I mean, Satan, he was around God all the time. He knew he was omnipotent. So to rebel against something that you can't win doesn't make any sense. But if you think that you can justify your cause and have your own universe to live in, and that he could rule over that, that's what they were trying to do. And that whole allegory is what the Star Wars allegory is all about. They just have good and evil inverted, which is what they tend to do in polytheist belief systems. But anyways, so they've been trying to destroy humankind ever since to prevent that from happening. And then when Jesus is in the grave, and it's talked about in the book of Peter, that he goes and talks to the spirits in the grave, that's who he's talking to, is the fallen angels and the worst of the demons in the abyss, telling you your rebellion is over. Right? because the resurrection has happened, and humans will be raised along with me above angels in the future time. But if we reel back to the antediluvian epoch in Genesis 6, they come with their second revenge. The first revenge is the fall of Adam. And then they put in the giants to rule over humans and to enslave them and probably wipe them from the face of the earth is the long-term plan, replaced with these new hybrid beings that don't have this promise. And so the world becomes so corrupted, God, to fulfill the promise, needs to start anew. And he does that with the purity of stock of Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, right? So that's the reason for the flood, is to make sure that he can fulfill the promise for humans so that they can be raised above angels in the future time. So in the end time, what is going on with that is that even though the angels and the demons know they can't win, they're just trying to take as many down with them as possible. But the humans and the followers on this earth and the royal bloodlines on this earth and the secret societies and the religions, what they believe and what they're told by the demons and the fallen angels is that you can win. And they want the end time. They want this rendezvous with destiny. They want this rebellion. They want to fight for their freedom, because they look at the God of the Bible as the evil God, as the one who oppresses people, as the one who does awful things to them, like the flood, as what they would give an example, or Sodom and Gomorrah, that he enslaves people in the physical world and keeps knowledge from them so that they will worship him. And the only way to gain your freedom is to fight, just as the rebellious angels did. So that's the lie that they're giving. And they also tell them that Satan is the equal to God. And that's part of the polytheist religion, this dualist religion of good versus evil in balance. Just as they have a dualism with the female goddess. So they actually want this rendezvous with destiny. And therefore they want to bring about the end time. And they're very, very powerful. And there's only one thing that prevents them to have brought it about beforehand, or today, or until the ordained time. And it is ordained, they will bring it about. And that is the restrainer. So given the choice, they would have the end time now, because they want to have this showdown. So does that make sense in terms of the question that you asked?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
You have any questions?
How about the I heard about Rh negative blood, or I don't know if I'm saying it right. What does that have to do with the Nephilim?
Yeah. So Rh negative blood is a designation that's in each of the 4 blood groups. And what it is for the audience is that if you've got negative blood, you are missing the D antigen. So that's the Rh, then the negative. So if you're, let's say, AB positive, then you have the D antigen. What an antigen is part of your immune system to attack viruses and bacteria. So for some reason, we have parts of the blood groups, and there's 15% of the world that are Rh negative. So it's not a large part. So where that comes in is people believe then that this is the intercession of the Nephilim bloodline from the angels, where the negative bloodlines come from. And I'm going to come full circle back on that. I just want to get that on the table. And if you were listening to what I was talking about earlier, that these Nephilim descendants after the flood set up the dynastic kingdoms that have ruled ever since, then these bloodlines have been kept all the way through. And they intermarry to keep those bloodlines pure. And so it's the belief that the Rh negative bloodline is the bloodline of the royals and the noble families that go back to Nephilim and the fallen angels. Whether that is or not is hard to know. But what we do know is from their belief system is that they do believe that they have at least another marker called the gene of Isis. And what the gene of Isis is, and that's their word for where Genesis comes from, is that that is the marker, the gene of the gods, right? And that gene would somehow manufacture a different type of blood. And Rh negative blood does not allow you to produce with positive blood. And beforehand, before you got married, until recent times, you would have to go take a blood test so that you could know whether you could have children or not, because an Rh negative mother, her body will kill the baby because you have this foreign influence that's happening in the body with the growing of the baby from the positive bloodline that it doesn't recognize. And that's not designed to kill babies. It's designed to kill bacteria and viruses, right? And today they have medical ways of suppressing that immune system so that attack doesn't happen. So that's where the whole ideology comes from, that this is the bloodline of the giants. And so a lot of people believe that it is the royal bloodlines is negative. And so if you get into, let's say, the British royal family, they have O negative blood as example.
Okay. I see that.
And if you get into the secret societies and, again, the Gnostic religion, and understand Gnostic religion is a global religion. It's a combination of cosmology of bringing all of these polytheist religions together. And the polytheist religions, whether it came out of Central America or it came out of North America or it came out of the Middle East or Africa, they're all the same religion. It all goes back to Enoch the Evil, and the pantheons. They have different names for the gods, but they're the same god. They're just distinguished by their own vernacular names, but it's the same hierarchy and it's the same gods. And so in their belief system is that they believe that these descendants of the demigods have this spark of the divine in them that's asleep and that's hidden. And you'll recognize that by some of the encrypted speeches that some of the politicians who are Gnostics will talk about. And not George Bush, but his father, H.W. Herbert Bush, and also George as well later, but Herbert is very much more famous for this. In a couple of speeches, he talked about 1,000 points of light in the New World Order. 1,000 points of light is a reference or an allegory for the spark of the divine, or the gene of Isis, or possibly the bloodline that they need to come together, right? And that's why they want world government, because in their belief system, when you harmonize all of the religions under one government, you will unite this divine spark for the descendants of the Nephilim so that those people can evolve or vibrate into godhood, which is right at a New Age belief system as well. They call it a harmonic conversion, is another name for it. So when I say that all of these religions are the same, understand they have the same belief system. And that's the same belief system that's in Eastern mysticism, whether it's Buddhism. And it doesn't matter whether or not you go to Indonesia or you go to South America. Polytheism is the same religion, and they all have the same belief system. And it's going to be harmonized in the end time with world government, which is why they want to bring about the end time.
Wow, amazing. I wanted to ask you, would you be able to give us info on immortals, demons, and angels?
How do you mean?
Like the difference between them?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, a fallen angel is a son of God. It is created immortal and can never die. And so, when we're told that they're going to be judged into the eternal lake of fire, they will be tortured forever. They can't die, right? And so this immortal is a being created by God without choice at the time. And they didn't have a choice to A, be born, and B, to accept what was going on. The only choice they had was to rebel, which some of them did, a third of them did. So there was about 100 million angels created. So we understand in Revelations that about a third of them were the ones who rebelled. So there's a lot of them. And they are still affecting this world. The ones who weren't impassioned are still affecting this world. Same as the demons that were not locked up are still affecting this world as well, as testified by Jesus with Legion. And the difference between a demon and a fallen angel is a demon is the bodiless spirit of the first generation of Nephilim. Still there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, I just wasn't sure whether or not we had lost you. So the difference between the two is there are two distinct groups. One is the offspring of the immortals, which are the fallen angels. And good angels too, but I classify the fallen angels as the ones who rebel.
Okay.
Did that make sense to you, Dina?
Yes, yes, it does.
Okay. So when we're talking about connecting prehistory to the end time, there's obviously, a lot of space that's in between even the time of Babel or Sodom and Gomorrah to the end time and even to today. And understand that these groups have been active all the way through, right? So you have this ancient knowledge coming down through the ancient mystery schools and the secret societies. And the kingships, even though not all of them are the noble bloodlines from the Nephilim, they kind of move back and forth with a bit of a rivalry. Is what's going on in history is this back and forth, and that the giants and the descendants of giants and the secret societies and the mystical religion are always trying to have power to bring about the ability to bring about the end time or universal world government and universal religion under, a new Antichrist or false Messiah. So this has been affecting our history all the way through. And we see some of these organizations and religions coming together. Let's say take the Knights Templar as a classic example of this organization working underneath and within the Roman Catholic Church. And again, they're looking for avenues to bring about world government. And the Templars are an organization that are, although they're within the Catholic Church, they are all Gnostics, just as all the Knights Templar are Masons and Gnostics, because Masonry and Gnosticism is the religion of Freemasonry, just as it is the Egyptian religion that they have, that is the allegorical side to that teaching. And so these organizations were working underground within the church, and then after the fall of the Templars, they split out because in 1307, when there's a move to destroy the Templars for being heretics, they don't want to have so much power in the West centralized into one organization again. So they evolved this into a number of other groups that start to rise up after the fall of the Templars. So Freemasonry through the Sinclairs in Scotland would be one of them. You also have the Rosicrucians that are one of the key groups that actually rise first. You also have the Jesuits that need to be recreated to continue to infiltrate Roman Catholicism, and you also have the Illuminati, whose job is to destroy Christianity and to focus on world government. You also have the Royal Society, which is designed to continue with and they're created by the Royal Society is created by Rosicrucians and Freemasons to take education away from the Roman Church so that they can have a public education, and to develop the 7 sacred sciences to honor the great architect of the universe, which is the god of the Freemasons and also the god of Mithraism, and just another name for Lucifer. And also to lead people away from God, not to give God credit for anything, and to start brainwashing people in preparation for the end time. Again, all the same goals that were there in prehistory with Enoch, son of Cain. And you also have one other group, because the Templars invented modern banking. And so the banking arm needed to be recreated. That's where the Rothschilds come in. And again, these are all Gnostics, and these are all secret societies, and they're all working towards the same goal. And that's where we see the modern wedge of these secret societies that are coming down the pipe. They keep genealogies all the way back to Nephilim, and their intent is to produce an antichrist at the end time from these bloodlines that have bloodlines that go back to the Nephilim and the fallen angels.
Okay.
Did I lose you somewhere there?
Nope, you sure didn't.
I know I covered a lot of a mouthful there. So, and each of these groups have different agendas. They're all working in the same goal, but they're all working to do the same thing because they want to bring about the end times. So what the Jesuits are trying to do within the Roman Church is to destroy the Roman Church from inside. And then there's a combination of Rosicrucians and Jesuit influence that goes after the Protestant churches. And what they're trying to do is get control of the Roman Church. And the Jesuits, who were created in about the 1500s by Assisi, he was actually a Basque who was part of even more pure blood than the 13 families. At least according to their belief system. And he also instituted the teaching of the 7 sciences and to interpret the Bible through the philosophy of the 7 sciences. So again, their whole approach is not the approach of Christianity. Their approach is to corrupt Christianity from within, because they want to have a universal religion, and the biggest obstacle to them to get what they want is Christianity, and in particularly the Roman Church. So if you understand what their objectives are, you'll better understand what we're seeing. And then for the first time, we have a Jesuit Pope who he's not, as some people will say, he's not the Antichrist and he's not false prophet, but he is going to change doctrine, and he is going to prepare the way for the false prophet to take over the Roman Church. Because the universal church, if you look at what the end time talks about, it is a religion that umbrellas all the religions, and it has two horns like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. So it's going to have sort of the clothing and the veneer of Christianity, but it's going to be polytheism underneath. So they need to get in and destroy Christianity from within. They need to de-deify Jesus and bring him back to mortal status. And those are the goals of all of these other groups. But within the Roman Catholic Church, that's what the Jesuits and the Gnostics are doing. And there's more than just Jesuits. You have Cistercians, Augustines, and you have Benedictines and several other orders. But those are Gnostic enclaves that are not working towards Christianity. And so all they're trying to do is prepare that end of it. You know, the Illuminati's goal is world government and to destroy Christianity. So they're also working at that. Freemasonry's job is to control the military, the media, and the government. And also to influence education, which they work in partnership with the Royal Society, which is, you know, basically is our modern education system. That's where it all comes from. And of course, you have the banking arm, which is the Rothschilds, which funds all of this, right? And they're the ones that are pushing for global free trade and for a cashless society. All of this is being worked on from all different aspects And it's all related to the same groups and the same bloodlines and the descendants of the people who rebelled many times throughout the millennia, including at the time of the flood and at the time of Sodom, at the time of Babel.
Wow, they're all working together in some different way.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see a lot of what they're trying to do through the literature and the entertainment that they produce, because again, they control our entertainment, because it's all part of the brainwashing to accept the end times. So when you see, let's say, superheroes of today, for example, and we have, let's take Superman as one of the thousands of superheroes. If we understand hero in its ancient context, that was understood in ancient times as the offspring of the gods, or a demigod. And if we look at Superman, he comes from the house of El. So he's actually the son of a god in the allegory. You have a red S on his chest that is, looks like a snake or a dragon or a seraphim angel or a red serpent, which would be the red dragon, which is Satan. You have an inverted pyramid, which again, we talked about the importance of pyramids, and it's part of the polytheist religion in history. And you have the color of yellow in the background in that pyramid, which stands for light and knowledge, because they believe they are the religion of knowledge and they are the children of light. So everything that we see, whether it's in science fiction, as I mentioned, in Star Wars, or in Superman and all of these superheroes, or in fairy tales, and what have you, is all recording a number of things. One is it's recording their history and their genealogy. It is recording their belief system or their religion, and it's also telling us what they're going to do. And they like to hide all of this right in front of our eyes, and nobody asks the right questions as to say, what's going on. And so they continue to move forward on their agenda, and it's used as propaganda to prepare us more easily for what they're going to tell us when we do get to the end time. And this is an MO that goes way back into prehistory. So if you're reading Homer from the Iliad, a writer of the Iliad or Greek classics, they're always talking about giants and the polytheist religion. If you're talking about Shakespeare rolling it forward several thousand years, that is just about genealogies of the bloodlines, and they're loaded with fairies, and again, just the same sort of MO. And again, fairy tales, fairy is such an important aspect of their belief system. And fairy has many, many, many different allegories to it. And so the fairy tale concept is very, very important to them to brainwash the little people. But fairy as an allegory is like a dragon allegory. A dragon allegory is the male bloodline. A fairy allegory is the matriarchal or the female bloodline. Because remember, as I said earlier, you have this dualist religion of good and evil and male and female gods and goddesses. And you also have fairies that are broken down into 4 different categories. So in fairy mythology, you have the godlike fairies that come from other planets, led by the proud angel who rebelled, and they're looking for a realm that they can rule on their own. And they produce earthborn fairies, which are known as the Tuatha De Danann in history, and the fairy people, which are just another name for Nephilim from another account. And then you also have the daemons, or the demons, which are the bodiless spirits of these earthborn fairies. And then you have a group called the elementals, which are little people. And they have 3 different classifications, one being gnomes, and another one being leprechauns, and another one being little people, which are the good-looking ones. The leprechaun category is the mischievous ones. But in the gnomes, you have several, and in each of the classifications, you have several different classifications. And what's interesting in the gnome one is that you have a group called the Little Greys. And these Little Greys have flying machines, and they come out of portals and through fairy domins, and they kidnap people, they do DNA manipulation, and they kidnap people, and then they'll return them after a fortnight. And in the book, I'll give a description of this. And if you didn't know, from what I write in there, that it was a fairy abduction, you'd swear it was a gray alien abduction. And so on so many different levels on what they're teaching in fairy allegory is they're teaching their genealogy, and they're teaching us what is going to take place. And I actually think the fairy, little people on the fairy allegory is just presented in a way to people before technology hits, and then it's been switched over to the alien allegory because our technology is advancing so quickly. So none of this is a coincidence. So we need, a Christian really needs to be very, very critical of everything that they're looking at. And what's also interesting is they also call the bloodline, the fairy bloodline is also the Grail bloodline. So when you get into, again, King Arthur, that is just another allegory of this literature that I was talking about, loaded with belief systems and loaded with allegories of history, genealogies, and what they're planning for the future, just as Lord of the Rings are. And again, if you take both of those two tales that I'm talking about, King Arthur, he is actually king of the fairies, and his wife is Guinevere, which is a variation on the name of what a fairy is called, coming out of Welsh and Irish language. And then you have fairies within King Arthur, like Morgan Le Fay. Le Fay is French for fairy. And you have the fairies of the lake who card these portals. And then you have them connected back to the Tuatha De Danann, who are fairies. They are the fair folk, the fairy people. And you have the Round Table, which is the same Round Table of the Lord of the Rings and the Anunnaki, and I'll come back to that in a second. And you have Merlin, which is this wizard or the priest or the allegory of the ancient religion that comes out of Atlantis and the antediluvian epoch, or a magi or a wise one. And Merlin is not a name; it's a title, by the way, a title of a priest in the magical polytheist religion. And so when you get into Lord of the Rings, then you have these same types of wizards. Right? You have the same polytheist belief, and you have all of these little beings, and they're fairy beings, they're elves, and they're hobbits, and they're dwarves. These are all part of the different classifications of fairy people. And the Lord of the Rings, it puts in some Norse fairy ideology and allegory into it, but it's telling a story of prehistory as they understood it with Middle Earth, which was created when the water was separated, that is talked about in Genesis. That's where the name Middle Earth comes from the Norse creation myth. Okay? And when we look at what happens at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is you see all of these interesting beings sailing off on a boat on the water, because now is the time of man. That's the allegory for the flood. Just over and over and over and over and over and over. And now you move, let's say, into the science fiction genre. And what is always going on in those stories? Well, there's some common denominators. One is that the world always unites because they're going to destroy themselves from the face of the earth, or the alien deception. The second thing is you always have a Eastern polytheist religion that's dominating science fiction as the religion, and they're always bringing knowledge to humans, just as the fallen angels did in the ancient time, because they added to the knowledge of the seven sacred sciences, which they call the illicit knowledge from heaven. So again, all of the allegory and all of the setup is the same thing. And again, it's designed to have us come together as one religion and one world government. And I can't think of something that would drive us together faster than having an encounter of aliens that is their introduction to us, where we are just another species in the universe. And there's this dualistic war that's going on, good versus evil. And we're going to be told in the end time that we are going to have to set up and fight for our freedom. And again, how does that sound with Star Wars?
Exactly, but I don't believe in all that at all.
That's what I was about to ask you.
The key thing though is it's not whether you believe it or I believe it. what's important to remember is that they believe it, and what they're doing with their belief and their knowledge, right? And they are going to bring about a deception, and I do believe that aliens are going to be part of that sort of deception. I think they're just demons and fallen angels, and there may be some beings that survived the flood, as in the fairy mythology might suggest. But again, it's going to be disguised as all of these beings from around the universe. It's the same thing that was around on the earth in the days of Noah.
Wow, amazing. That's what I was about to ask you about the alien deception, but you beat us to it. You're right on the money.
Well, and we hear about, tinges of that in prophecy, where you have this Revelation 12, this war in heaven, and you have, you see things going on in the sky where there's a battle, and now they're thrown down to the earth for the last 3.5 years. Or in Daniel, where Antichrist is going to raise his throne into the heavens. This is, to me, I think, from how we understand it with God and angels and our participation in the earth, how we would understand it. But if you were to take a step back and say, how would you spin that from a polytheist perspective to deceive human beings to accept world government and to accept Antichrist, is they're going to say, hey, we're just one of many in the universe, and this is this galactic war that's going on.
Wow. You know so much, Gary. You are, wow, amazing. You've done a lot of research.
I was about to ask him too about that galactic war that's supposed to be going on in the heavens. I know it says in the Bible, it says it's a cosmic war.
Well,
isn't that what it states?
Yeah, it says that there's a war in heaven, right? So you can take that, what does it mean by heaven? It could be in the firmament just above us, or it could be in another dimension. So depending on how you want to understand that, and that the immortal ones, the rebellious angels, are now thrown down to the earth for the last 3.5 years. It's in Revelation 12. I think it happens so that we can see it. And that's how they help with the deception, that this is this battle amongst two factions of the galaxy, so to speak.
And I was going to ask you too. You opened it up when you said about the Rothschilds, how everything goes back to them. I was about to ask you, hey, do they actually believe that they're a bloodline, like they actually have the bloodline, or are they the bloodline?
Yeah. So the Rothschilds, they were the Bauer family that rose up within the courts of the German royal family to help service them, and they were changed their name to Rothschilds after 1798 when they opened up the London Bank. Now, they were the ones that were brought in to replace the Templar banking arm. And so because we know where they're traced back to, we know they've also been intermarrying in noble bloodlines. And they do say, like David Rothschild said, that his bloodlines go back to the Essenes, it goes back to the gods of prehistory, and also back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene is what he's on the record for saying. But he's intermarried into that. He's not part of the true and noble bloodlines. They've been improving on their bloodlines over the years with intermarriage, but they were kind of on the outside. So they're not as pure as what people think. And because they're so visible, they're not the ones that hold the true power. What you actually see is being controlled by the 13 families.
And the 13 families are who?
Well, there's a lot of them, and there's a number of different branches to them. These are for the West in terms of the bloodlines, right? So these are the same families that created, a lot of them created the Knights Templar. So you have famous families out of history, like the link back to the Plantagenets, which is a branch off of the Dukes of Anjou. And so Anjou, Plantagenet, or Plantard, they're all related. That would be one of those groups. You also have the Stuart dynasty, and they were a coming together of so many ennobled bloodlines that it is considered the House of Gold, and probably the most ennobled bloodline since the Merovingians. So the House of Stuart is a very, very ennobled bloodline. You also have the St. Clairs, which became the Sinclairs. which the Sinclairs were the ones who restarted Freemasonry after the fall of the Knights Templar. So those are a few of the names, and there are more. And they're in my book, and you can look them up. But that should give you a pretty good idea. And again, I don't know whether any of your audience have seen on some of the internet researches that most of the presidents take their lineage back to the Plantagenet dynasty, right?
Yes, they do.
Which is an interesting coincidence. You also have the House of Windsor, which is still on the throne of England, which are purebloods. You've got the Habsburgs, which is another family. So, anyways, you kind of get the idea. And also the King of Spain, Carlos, is very highly ennobled the bloodlines, but more connected through the Habsburgs. But what's interesting about the King of Spain is they have what is called the King of Jerusalem title.
Wow.
And that's a very, very important title. And as they connect their bloodlines back through the Merovingians, which has what they believe the surviving bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which is false, but that's what they believe. But also all of these other Nephilim bloodlines, and the Merovingians were at that time the most ennobled bloodline on the planet, they believed. And so that also included the bloodlines of King Saul and the Benjamite bloodline. And if you go back into the book of Joshua, Joshua awarded the Benjamites Jerusalem. And that's why in 1099, when they set up the Knights Templar and had the initiation of the setup, he had a very small priory in Sion that they call the Abbey or the Priory of Notre Dame de Sion, which is where the name Priory of Sion comes from. Is they tried to initiate Godfrey de Bouillon, who was a descendant of the Merovingians and one of the founders of the Knights Templar, with the King of Jerusalem title. He refused it, but in 1118 at the same temple, Baldwin de Bouillon, or Godfrey de Bouillon's brother, accepted the King of Jerusalem title, and it's gone and awarded to different kings all the way through history. So like the Habsburg held it for a long period of time as an example of famous kings who would have held the King of Jerusalem title, or Charlemagne would have had it. And what's important to know about this is that the Antichrist will take his bloodlines back through these bloodlines, through the Merovingians and the King of Jerusalem title. So at the time of the abomination, when he's crowned as God in the temple, causing the abomination in the last 3.5 years, he is going to accept the King of Jerusalem title. So follow the King of Jerusalem title.
Wow.
Wow.
I didn't even know that. Now that's something that I'm gonna have to look into.
Yeah, and you got to get into secret society documents and belief systems and things like that to follow that through. Now, do I actually believe that he'll have the right and the bloodlines? I think those are all alleged, but again, it's not what I believe; it's what they believe and what they're going to present as its pedigree. And again, part of the pedigree of the Antichrist is going to be something that astonishes people, just as that interesting thing that we talked about, possibly being possessed by one of the beings coming out of the abyss, because he comes up out of the abyss, the Antichrist, who kills the 2 witnesses in Revelation. And he is the one that once was, now and not, but will be again. So there's something very mysterious about who this Antichrist is and how he changes, or how he becomes possessed. I think he becomes possessed.
I have a feeling that he might end up wanting. I'm not very familiar with that. What's going on with the Planet X or Nemesis system that they're trying? They're talking. Well, I have a feeling that he's just gonna try to say he's gonna perform some kind of miracle, as it's supposed to be saying that the East is supposed to get hit with this asteroids. Yeah. I'm feeling it's gonna be how you call it, the West Side. The West Side that's going to perform a miracle on, and everybody's going to believe that that's him.
Yeah, he's going to do things that are absolutely astonishing, and the world is going to wonder after him. So not only in his oratory skills, not only in his ability to solve problems and rule, but he's going to have the full power of the false prophet and the full power of Satan behind him. So I think if we are around when he is ascending to power and rules, then we will be absolutely astonished at what this individual can do for a short period of time.
Yeah, I would. I hope. I really don't. In a way, I do hope I would be the one to be alive to see that. But then again, when I read Revelation, that is a, that
Yeah.
is a,
Yeah, I have the same feelings. It's like, wouldn't you like to witness that? And then I'm going, well, maybe I don't. That's not going to be a pleasant period of time. So,
yeah. So we're both on the same page.
yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's why, I've documented and connected these dots so that people, if they want to dig into this a little bit further, I'll provide a lot more context within the book, and I'll connect that all the way through history so that people can follow the secret societies and the religion. And I know a lot of people today think that the religion is going to be Islam. Islam, it's too painful to try and convert everybody to a one world religion through violence. It's going to be something different than Islam. It's going to be greater than Islam. Islam is going to be swallowed like the rest of the religions into this universal religion. And just as with Antichrist, as Antichrist figures in the past, whether or not it's Hitler or it's Napoleon or Julius Caesar or Alexander or all of these other figures out of history, is it's proven that you can't conquer the whole world. It just takes too much time and there's too much resistance. And so what has to happen is that you have to have the world wanting to convert, and you have to have world government. And when you have the universal religion in place and the world government in place, then Antichrist can usurp power and take over in a coup, which he does, and which is talked about in Revelation, where the 10 kings will conspire with Antichrist to destroy Babylon, and he'll set up another religion after that, but become Antichrist as leader of the world. So that's why it's important to watch what is being built today. It's why it's important to watch how the religions are communicating more. But it's going to take cataclysms to drive it. The evolution aspect is not going to work fast enough. So they're going to have cataclysms and a wow factor, whether it's through aliens or through nuclear war or a series of cataclysms to bring this about.
Well, I do see a lot of cataclysm going on right now with all these earthquakes and all the sinkholes. So I really do believe right now that we are living in Revelation's time right now.
I think, we're definitely haven't seen the start of the last 7 years, and I'm not one to get stuck on dates or anything, but if we're not very, very close to the end time, it's certainly on the horizon. I just think there's too many things that are coming together, and I do see things like earthquakes happening with greater, more often and in greater intensity, like the birth pangs would do as you go to deliver the end time and birth. And I see more things happening with the environment that are happening and causing things more often, again, whether or not it's tornadoes or whatever, right? But those are all part of the birth pangs and the signs that Jesus gave us. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah, and that's the main thing. Well, we talk about that, and when she starts, she sends me articles about earthquakes or sinkholes or some kind of coming. I just tell her, man, you know what? These things are piling up, after one after another. I told her, we're living in times already. I believe we are, but I agree with you. We're not actually there yet, but we are seeing the birth pains of the end times.
Yeah, and if you match up some other things that are going on, if you look at 1947, when Israel was established as a country, and then in 1967 you have Jerusalem being retaken, and we bring in the prophecy of the fig tree that Jesus talked about, that in this generation is when the end time is going to come, and the fig tree is Israel or Jerusalem, depending on how you want to define that. And then it's only a matter of how long is a generation. And most people look at that as about 70 years from the Bible, but that's, we don't know whether that's the number. But if you plug 70 years either onto 1947 or 1967, you start with 2017 to 2037 as a possible window. Now, what's interesting about that is if you go to, I don't know whether you're familiar with the prophecy of Jubilees.
Yeah, and the Shemitah.
Yeah, well, this is the one that was done by comes out of the Jewish community in about the 1200s. And so they do a prophecy of 10 Jubilees, and it begins with the Ottoman Empire in 1517. So the prophecy is done in about 1200, and first fulfillment comes about in 1517, and a Jubilee is 50 years. So the first 8 Jubilees is going to be ruled over by the Ottoman Empire, and that takes you to 1917. The second Jubilee, which is 50 years, which will now take you to 1967, is it's going to be essentially ruled over. It will be a lawless land. There won't be a real government in place on that. And then the next Jubilee is the time of the control of Jerusalem of the Jewish people, and after that is 2017 begins the Messianic time. So there's an interesting parallel out. Now, it's not canonized, but it's out there as you can look at that. You also look at the Catholic prophecies of Malachi, where he predicted all of the popes to the end time. It counted them and gave clues as how to look for them. And there's a little bit of dispute whether or not we're on the last one or the second last one. But the last pope was going to be called the anti-pope, and he's the one who makes the way for the false prophet. And he's the one who changes the doctrine and sets the stage up for false prophet. The false prophet makes the way for Antichrist, just as the Elijah made the way is to make the way for Jesus, and John the Baptist made the way for Jesus. And the two hints on that was a anti-pope. And if you look at the word Antichrist and you use the King James Bible and you take that back to its Greek meaning, it can mean two things. One as being the opposite or opposing Christ, or a replacement Christ. Well, and if you take that same meaning over to anti-pope, as he's called, then in this case, if we use replacement pope, he is one of the few popes, and I think there's only one other one in about 1600 under Pope Gregory, if I recall correctly, where there was a pope that was replaced who's still living and is still, alive. Usually they wait till they die, right? And so he is a replacement pope. And the other clue was a black pope. So people were looking for the last pope to be elected to come out of Africa or somewhere like that. But he's a Jesuit, as I mentioned earlier. And the leader of the Jesuit order is called the Black Pope. And the White Pope is the one who leads the Vatican. So now we have that unified, and we have a Black Pope who's actually an anti-pope, who is arguably the last pope before the false prophet, or the one that's to come. So we're very, very close from that aspect of the end time as well. And again, I'm not setting dates. I'm just sort of bringing in other things from around that might suggest that we're kind of in that time frame. And again, the Nostradamus prophecies, even though they are really opaque, there's a lot of consensus that says somewhere around 2030 is the arrival of Antichrist.
Yeah, I believe that's what he had. I think it was 2033 or something like that.
Yeah. So again, just a lot of things starting to come together. And so, yeah, I think we can look out the window and almost see it coming. So, and really, I think the only thing that's preventing things from bringing about the end time is have the full numbers of the Gentiles been fulfilled, and when is the restrainer going to be removed?
Yep. Wow, you're amazing. I mean, you opened up my mind to something else. You know, like I said, I was familiar with your work. Now I have somewhere else to put my mind into.
Yeah.
So I could go other study. That's the main thing I like to do. History was my favorite subject in school, and that's why I like going
Yeah.
back to.
So we did I did a pretty much a large overview and lightly skimming on a lot of topics. And if we do another show down the road, maybe we can take a topic and fully develop it, because there's so much information that comes in some of these areas that your audience will let you know which areas they'd like to hear a little bit more about. And but anyways, what we were able to do today was we were at least able to give sort of a full understanding what the Genesis 6 conspiracy is, and some of the many sort of avenues that's involved on it.
Like,
Yes, we would love to have you on again, Gary. I mean, you are amazing. You've done a lot of research, and I know there's so much more to talk about that you have to put on the table. So much more, and I know like 2-3 hours is not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And at some point in time, people start to get a little bit of information overload as well. So so it's nice to do a bit of an overview, and then if there's some areas where you think your audience want to me to come back to and spend some time on, then I'd love to come back and talk about it. So
Will do.
yeah.
me,
Most
I
definitely.
would love to have him back on again so we could go ahead and talk more about the Nephilim and the Raphaim, because that's where he got me. Because that's the main thing I really I'm interested in.
Oh yeah, and if you want to get into what Gibborim are, and there's so many fascinating things, so we can just talk specifically about the Nephilim on the next show, and probably give more information than people ever thought were possible on the Nephilim. So
Yeah, that's why I said, when I heard you about that, and like I said, I was hearing you other interviews you did before. I was amazed at what you were saying, so I thought you were gonna do a little bit more. But when I seen that you're breaking it up a little bit more about more or less of what we were talking about, I was like, oh man, you know what? I'm gonna have to talk to more about this.
And how can people get in contact with you, Gary, if they ever wanted, to do an interview with you? And how can they get your book? You can go ahead and give your information.
Sure. And get hold of me in a number of ways. The first way is to get a hold of me through my website, which is www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. And on the website, if you're interested in my book, I've got a generous excerpt on all 98 chapters, so you'll get a good feel for what's in the book. I do have some other interviews up there, so you can get, again, a more feel for some deeper issues if you want to look at some specifics. And you can also get a hold of me through the contact the author section and email me off of that. And also off the website, you can purchase my book from me if you're looking for a signed copy. And if out of the U.S., if your card gets rejected, get a hold of your credit card company, because they probably have a foreign purchase restriction on to prevent credit card theft, which can happen. But if you get a hold of them, then the transaction will go through, because they'll lift that restriction. And you can also have a link to the Kindle version of the book off the website, and to barnesandnoble.com and to amazon.com, because they both carry the book, and they will sell it for less money than me, because I am under contract not to discount from the retail price. And you can also get a hold of me, or you can also get my book through pretty much any online bookstore. They're all carrying it, and if you wanted to support your own local bookstore, whether it's secular or Christian, they likely don't have it on the shelf, but you can order it through Bookmasters, who distributes it. So, and will be familiar with Bookmasters, and they go online and they can order the book in for you. You can also follow me on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I have two Genesis 6 conspiracy pages. And I post on there quite regularly a little bit about the book and other items that are of interest. And if you get a hold of me on Facebook, I'll get a hold of you as well, or on the website, or through Twitter at Gary Wayne63 at Gary Wayne63. If you get a hold of me with a question, you can count on me getting back to you.
Yeah, I put all that in the description too.
Terrific.
I don't have your book, but I will be purchasing it.
Like when he said Amazon, that's exactly where I ordered it from too.
Amazon.
they sell a lot of books for me, so I'm just happy that people are buying the books. And again, for sure, I know a lot of people say, you know, they'll get back to them if you get a hold of the author, but I spend a lot of time every day just communicating with people whether or not they buy my book or not. My whole mission isn't necessarily to sell books. That's a byproduct. If somebody likes what I say, what I'm saying, they might buy the book, but I'm more about getting the information out. So that's why I give so much information out on the interviews.
Wow. You're an amazing person, Gary. Really are.
It was nice meeting you, talking to you, you know, and I appreciate you giving us the time, you know, and I call opening up our minds, you know. Like I said, you blew me away when you talk about the Nephilim, Raphaim, and then you started going down the line more and more about like leprechauns and the fairies, and I was like, whoa, you know what? Like I said, I got to get another.
Yeah, like
We
I
got to
say,
get another interview.
yeah, fairies is a whole show in itself. Like there's so many things in the book that I basically do just a whole show on when I'm doing interviews, because there's just so much fascinating information that's there. So
That's basically the word I was about to say. Is fascinating. All right, Gary, it's nice meeting. Like I said, God bless you. Take care. I wish the best, and you know, I hope we get to hear from you again. Like I said, and only that, you write another book, because like I said, I'm a big fan of yours now.
terrific. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you have a big fan here
Well,
also too, Gary. And thank you so much for doing this interview with us. And we hope to hear from you soon. And I will get in contact with you. Let you know
Thank
when
you,
we can
Dina.
set up another date.
Thank you, Dina. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
right,
Thank you. You
right.
have a good day, and
You too.
God bless.
God bless.
God bless you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.